Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UE's horizon, looking out at the vast field of floating rocks. He had been exploring space for 20 years, but the asteroid field in the Kepler 442 system was different from anything he had seen. Before, the rocks were bigger here, and they moved in strange patterns that made no sense. "Captain, we're getting something weird on the scanners," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. She was the ship's best sensor operator, and her voice carried a tone of excitement that Jake had learned to trust over the years. Jake walked over to look at her screen. Among the floating rocks, there was something that definitely did not belong. It was huge, much bigger than any asteroid, and it had smooth surfaces that caught the light from the distant star. The shape was all wrong for a natural object. "How big is it?" Jake asked. "Nearly 3 kilometers long, sir. And it's made of metal, not rock." Dr. Lisa Campbell hurried over from her workstation. She was the ship's expert on alien things, and she had spent her whole career hoping to find something like this. Her hands shook as she looked at the readings. "It's a ship," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "An alien ship." Jake felt his heart beat faster. In all his years of exploring, he had never found proof of other intelligent life. Earth scientists had always wondered if humans were alone in the galaxy. Now, floating in front of them was the answer. "Take us closer," Jake ordered, "but keep our distance. We don't know if it's still active." The horizon moved carefully through the asteroid field. As they got closer, more details became clear. The alien ship was covered in scars and dents from impacts with space rocks. Parts of its hull were torn open, showing dark spaces inside. But despite all the damage, the ship was still in one piece. "I'm not reading any power signatures," Amy reported. "No heat, no energy, no movement. It looks dead." "How long has it been here?" Jake asked. Dr. Campbell was already running calculations on her computer. "Based on the impact damage and the way it's positioned in the field, I'd say at least several hundred years. Maybe more." The ship's design was unlike anything in Earth's databases. Where human ships were built with smooth curves and clean lines, this vessel was all angles and sharp edges. It looked like it had been designed by someone who thought only about fighting. Every surface seemed to have weapons built into it. "Sir, I'm detecting a large breach in the hull," Amy said. "Section 7, port side. It's big enough for our shuttle to fly through." Jake made his decision. "Get Commander Ryan Hayes and his team ready. We're going aboard." 2 hours later, Jake watched as the shuttle carrying the boarding party disappeared into the dark opening in the alien ship. Hayes was his best officer, a man who had served in the Colonial Marines before joining the Exploration Service. If anyone could handle first contact with an alien vessel, it was him. "Horizon, this is Hayes. We're inside the ship now." The commander's voice came through the radio with some static. "The corridors are huge. These beings were much bigger than U's." Jake could hear the wonder in Hayes's voice as he described what they were seeing. The walls were lined with strange symbols and what looked like weapon controls. The ceilings were so high that the team's lights couldn't reach them. Everything was built on a scale that made humans seem tiny. "We're finding remains," Hayes reported. After they had been inside for an hour. "Skeletal remains. These aliens were at least 3 meters tall, maybe more. Their bones are thick and heavy." Dr. Campbell leaned forward, listening to every word. "Can you tell how they died?" "No obvious wounds or damage to the bones. It looks like they just stopped, like something made them all collapse at once." The team continued deeper into the ship, mapping corridors and rooms as they went. They found what looked like living quarters, eating areas, and workspaces, but everything was built for giants. "Captain, you need to see this," Hayes said. His voice sounded different, now more serious. "We found what looks like their command center. There are computers here, and some of them are still working." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Still working after all these years? The power cells are unlike anything we've seen. They're still at nearly full charge. Dr. Campbell, can you walk me through accessing their data? For the next several hours, the team worked to connect human computers to the alien systems. It was slow work, made harder by the fact that everything was written in symbols no human had ever seen. But finally, they made a breakthrough. "We're getting something," Hayes reported. "Text, images, some kind of records. The translation program is working on it now." Back on the horizon, Jake waited with growing excitement and worry. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be humanity's greatest moment. But finding them all dead in a ship that had been drifting for centuries was not how anyone had imagined it would happen. "Captain, the translation is starting to work," Dr. Campbell said. "I can make out some words." This species called themselves the Carvax. They were some kind of empire that conquered other worlds. Jake felt another chill. Conquered other worlds? That's what it looks like. And Captain, there's something else. The last entries in their log mention a mission. They were sent to destroy a planet inhabited by what they called primitive creatures. Which planet? Dr. Campbell looked up from her screen, her face pale. The coordinates match Earth's location. "Captain, they came to destroy us." Jake stared at the alien ship on the main screen. 800 years ago, when humans were just beginning to explore their own solar system, these creatures had come to wipe them out, but something had stopped them. Something had killed them all and left their ship drifting in space. "Hayes, how much more data can you download?" "We're pulling everything we can, sir." "But there's a lot of it." "This ship has been recording everything for centuries." Jake made another decision. "Pack up everything you can carry. We're taking this ship home." The next several days were spent preparing the alien vessel for the journey back to Earth. Human engineers worked around the clock to attach towing cables to the massive ship. It would be a slow trip, but they would bring humanity's first proof of alien life back home as the Horizon began its journey back to human space. Jake stood on the bridge looking at the alien ship following behind them. Somewhere in its databanks was the story of what had happened 800 years ago. Somewhere in its computers was the answer to why the Carvax had failed in their mission to destroy Earth. Jake had a feeling that when they finally translated all the records, they would learn something amazing about humanity. Something that would change how humans saw themselves and their place in the galaxy. The Carvax had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had found something that had killed them all. Now it was time to learn what that something was. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. During that time, teams of experts worked day and night to translate the alien records. Dr. Lisa Campbell barely slept as she fed more and more data through the translation programs. Each new file revealed more about the Carvax and their failed mission. Captain Jake Morrison found himself spending hours reading the translated reports. The picture that emerged was both terrifying and amazing. The Carvax had been one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds and destroyed entire species that refused to submit to their rule. "Captain, you need to see this," Dr. Campbell said on the 10th day of their journey. She looked tired but excited as she handed him a tablet. With the latest translation, Jake read the report carefully. It was a military assessment of Earth, written by Carvax scouts who had observed the planet before the main fleet arrived. The document was filled with contempt for humanity and confidence in an easy victory. They called Earth a Class 15 death world, Dr. Campbell explained. That's the highest danger rating in their system. They couldn't believe that intelligent life could develop on such a hostile planet. Jake continued reading. The Carvax had been amazed by Earth's violent weather, its unstable geology, and its deadly ecosystems. They had observed volcanic eruptions, massive storms, earthquakes, and tsunamis. They had cataloged Earth's poisonous plants, dangerous animals, and deadly diseases. To them, Earth was a nightmare world, Dr. Campbell said. They couldn't understand how anything could live there, let alone develop intelligence. They expected to find a few scattered tribes of primitive beings, barely surviving in caves and hiding from their planet's dangers. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez joined them, carrying another tablet full of translated files. Captain, wait until you see what they found when they actually arrived. The next set of documents told a very different story. The Carvax had expected to find cowering primitives. Instead, they had found humans who had not only survived on their death world, but had thrived. The humans of 800 years ago had built cities, developed technology, and were already taking their first steps into space. Look at this tactical report, Amy said, pointing to a section of text. The Carvax commander couldn't believe what he was seeing. Humans had turned their planet's dangers into advantages. They had learned to predict volcanic eruptions and use the heat for energy. They had built cities that could survive earthquakes and storms that would destroy most alien settlements. Jake felt a growing sense of pride as he read more. The Carvax had been completely wrong about humanity. They had seen Earth's harsh environment as a weakness, but humans had made it a source of strength. Here's where it gets really interesting, Dr. Campbell said, pulling up another file. The Carvax tried their standard intimidation tactics. They appeared in Earth's sky with their massive warships and demanded immediate surrender. How did humans respond? Jake asked. They told the Carvax to go to hell. Jake laughed despite himself. Even 800 years ago, humans had been stubborn and defiant. The Carvax had expected gratitude for a primitive species being offered the chance to join their empire. Instead, they had been met with insults and threats. The Carvax decided to teach humanity a lesson, Amy continued. They began bombing military installations and major cities. They expected humans to surrender within hours, but they didn't. No, sir, they didn't. And that's when the Carvax began to realize they had made a terrible mistake. The next section of records showed the Carvax's growing confusion and alarm. Every attack on Earth was met with fierce resistance. Human military forces didn't scatter and hide like the aliens expected. Instead, they regrouped, adapted, and struck back with weapons and tactics the Carvax had never encountered. The humans were using everything as weapons, Dr. Campbell explained. Mining equipment became artillery. Construction tools became boarding weapons. Even their civilian vehicles were turned into missile platforms. Jake read report after report of human ingenuity in action. When the Carvax destroyed human military bases, humans moved their operations underground and into space. When alien forces landed on Earth, they found themselves fighting not just soldiers, but entire populations that had turned their cities into fortresses. The Carvax had never seen anything like it, Amy said. Every species they had conquered before had followed predictable military patterns. They would group their forces, try to protect their population centers, and eventually surrender when the cost became too high. But humans were different, completely different. They didn't just fight with their military. They fought with their entire civilization. Scientists became weapons designers. Engineers became tactical planners. Even children were helping by carrying messages and supplies. The reports showed that the Carvax had been unprepared for human creativity. Where other species followed established military doctrines, humans improvised and adapted. They used their knowledge of Earth's environment to create traps and ambushes. That caught the aliens completely off guard. Look at this battle report, Dr. Campbell said, showing Jake a detailed account. Human forces in the Pacific used underwater volcanic vents to hide their submarines. When the Carvax came looking for them, they found themselves under attack from weapons they couldn't detect. Another report described how human engineers had modified their space stations to create massive electromagnetic pulses. They had used these to disable entire Carvax fleets, leaving the alien ships helpless in space. The psychological impact was enormous, Amy added. The Carvax had built their empire on the belief that their technology made them invincible. Humans were proving that intelligence and determination could overcome any technological advantage. Jake continued reading as more and more files were translated. The picture that emerged was of a species that refused to accept defeat. Every setback made humans more determined. Every loss made them more creative. Every challenge made them stronger. Here's the most important part, Dr. Campbell said, pulling up a file marked with urgent priority symbols. This is a message from the YA, Carvax fleet commander, to his superiors. He's asking for reinforcements. Jake read the message carefully. The Carvax commander was clearly desperate. He described human forces that seemed to be everywhere at once, striking from directions that should have been impossible. He reported weapons that shouldn't exist and tactics that defied all military logic. He's scared, Jake realized. Terrified. Amy agreed. The Carvax had never encountered a species that fought like humans. They were used to conquering civilized worlds, with established militaries and predictable responses. Earth was chaos, and humans had learned to thrive in chaos. The final message in the file was even more revealing. The Carvax commander had written, "These creatures are not like the others we have faced. They do not fight like a military force. They fight like their entire planet has declared war on us. Every human is a soldier. Every city is a fortress. Every piece of technology is a weapon." Jake set down the tablet and looked out at the alien ship following behind them. The Carvax had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had found humanity at its most dangerous, a species that had spent millions of years learning to survive on a world that tried to kill them every single day. "There's more," Dr. Campbell said quietly. "The records show that humans didn't just defend Earth. They went on the offensive." Jake looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean that humans somehow managed to track the Carvax fleet and launch attacks on their ships. Using primitive rockets and sheer determination, they boarded alien vessels and captured them." The implications were staggering. Humans 800 years ago had not only survived an attack by one of the galaxy's most powerful empires, they had turned the tables and begun winning the war. How is that possible? Jake asked. Dr. Campbell smiled. Because they were human. And humans, it turns out, are very good at turning impossible situations into victories. The translation teams worked faster as they got closer to Earth. Every new file they decoded revealed more about the war that had saved humanity, before most humans even knew they were fighting for their lives. Captain Jake Morrison found himself amazed by what his species had accomplished 800 years ago. "Captain, we've got detailed battle reports now," Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez said as she brought him the latest translations. The Carvax kept very careful records of their defeats. Jake took the tablet and began reading. The first report described something that should have been impossible. Human forces had somehow managed to board and capture a Carvax destroyer, using nothing but modified mining equipment and incredible courage. How did they even get close enough? Jake wondered aloud. Dr. Lisa Campbell looked up from her workstation. They used asteroids. The humans hollowed out space rocks and turned them into attack vehicles. The Carvax sensors couldn't tell the difference between natural asteroids and the ones hiding human boarding parties. The report described the attack in detail. Human engineers had spent weeks preparing hollowed-out asteroids, installing life support systems, and maneuvering thrusters. When the Carvax fleet moved through an asteroid field, dozens of these hidden weapons had come to life. The aliens had no idea what hit them, Amy said. Their sensors showed normal space rocks floating nearby. Then suddenly, humans were cutting through their hulls with industrial mining lasers. Jake continued reading. The human boarding parties had been outnumbered and outgunned, but they had advantages that Carvax hadn't expected. Growing up on a death world had made humans incredibly tough and adaptable. They could survive in conditions that would kill most other species. "Look at this part," Dr. Campbell said, pointing to a section of the report. The Carvax crew tried to repel the boarders by venting atmosphere from their ship. They thought it would kill the humans instantly. But it didn't work. The humans had brought their own air supplies and were already wearing full environmental suits. They were used to working in the vacuum of space. To them, it was just another day at work. The report went on to describe how the human boarding party had systematically taken control of the alien ship. They had used their knowledge of industrial equipment to disable the ship's weapons and engines. Within hours, they had captured a vessel that was centuries ahead of their own technology. That was just the beginning, Amy said, showing Jake another file. Once humans had captured their first Carvax ship, they learned how to capture more. The next series of reports painted a picture of escalating human success. Each captured ship gave humans more knowledge of Carvax technology. Human engineers, who had spent their lives making broken equipment work in impossible conditions, quickly figured out how to repair and modify alien systems. The Carvax couldn't believe what was happening, Dr. Campbell said. They had never seen a species reverse engineer their technology so quickly. Within weeks, humans were using modified Carvax weapons against them. Jake read about human creativity in action. Earth's engineers had taken alien energy weapons and combined them with human targeting systems. They had modified Carvax shields to work with human power sources. They had even figured out how to use alien life support systems to create better environmental suits. "Here's my favorite part," Amy said, showing Jake a particularly detailed report. The humans captured a Carvax communication array and started listening to their military communications. Then they began feeding false information to the alien fleet. The report described how human intelligence officers had learned to mimic Carvax communication patterns. They had convinced alien ships to move to specific locations where human forces were waiting in ambush. They had even managed to get Carvax vessels to attack each other by sending fake orders. The psychological warfare was devastating, Dr. Campbell explained. The Carvax had built their empire on the belief that they were superior to all other species. Humans were proving that intelligence and determination mattered more than advanced technology. Jake found himself grinning as he read more reports. Human forces had used their knowledge of Earth's environment to create weapons the Carvax had never imagined. They had turned chunks of ice into kinetic missiles, using Earth's gravity to accelerate them to incredible speeds. They had used solar collectors to create focused energy beams that could cut through alien armor. The Carvax kept trying to adapt, Amy said. They changed their tactics, upgraded their defenses, brought in more ships. But every time they thought they had figured out how to fight humans, we came up with something new. One report described how human forces had used their space stations as massive kinetic weapons. They had rigged the stations with rocket motors and crashed them into Carvax ships at tremendous speed. The aliens had never seen anything like it. A species that was willing to sacrifice their own infrastructure to win a battle. They couldn't understand human thinking, Dr. Campbell said. To the Carvax, war was about preserving your own forces while destroying the enemy. But humans seemed willing to sacrifice anything to protect Earth. Jake read about human pilots who had deliberately crashed their ships into alien vessels when their weapons ran out. He read about human soldiers who had held their positions against impossible odds to buy time for evacuations. He read about human civilians who had volunteered for suicide missions to take out key alien targets. The Carvax had never faced anything like it, Amy said. Every other species they had conquered had eventually reached a point where the cost of resistance became too high. But humans just kept fighting, no matter what it cost them. The reports showed that the Carvax had become increasingly desperate as the war continued. They had deployed biological weapons, only to discover that humans had already developed immunity to similar diseases through their exposure to Earth's hostile environment. They had tried to use captured humans as hostages, only to find that human forces would attack anyway to prevent their technology from being studied. Here's where it gets really interesting, Dr. Campbell said, showing Jake a series of intercepted communications. The Carvax started questioning their own military doctrine. They began to wonder if their entire approach to warfare was wrong. The communications showed Carvax officers discussing human tactics with a mixture of fear and admiration. They had begun to study human military history, trying to understand how a species could be so effective at war while still being so young and technologically primitive. They discovered that humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years, Amy explained. Every type of warfare they could imagine, humans had already tried. Desert warfare, jungle warfare, mountain warfare, underwater warfare, aerial warfare. Humans had experience with all of it. Jake read a particularly revealing message from a Carvax military analyst. The alien had written, "These creatures have spent their entire evolutionary history at war, not just with each other, but with their planet itself. Every day of their lives is a battle for survival. They do not know how to surrender, because surrender means death on their world." The final set of battle reports showed the complete collapse of the Carvax invasion. Their fleet had been reduced to a handful of ships, and those that remained were barely functional. Human forces had captured most of their vessels and were using them to hunt down the survivors. "The last battle was fought here," Dr. Campbell said, pointing to the location where they had found the derelict ship. The Carvax flagship was trying to escape when something went wrong with their power systems. Jake looked at the final report. The Carvax commander had written a last message to his empire before the ship's systems failed. The message was simple but powerful. The Death World creatures cannot be defeated. They have turned their planet's cruelty into their greatest strength. We came to destroy them, and they have destroyed us instead. What happened to the crew? Jake asked. Best guess is that their life support systems failed, Amy replied. They were so focused on trying to escape that they didn't notice the damage to their ship until it was too late. Jake set down the tablet and looked out at the alien ship following behind them. The Carvax had been one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, but they had been defeated by a species that had barely begun to explore space. The victory had been so complete that the aliens had chosen to hide the truth rather than admit their failure. "There's one more thing," Dr. Campbell said quietly. "The Carvax didn't just lose the war. They made sure no one else would ever find out about it." She showed Jake a final set of files, orders from the Carvax High Command to classify Earth as a forbidden zone and to spread false information about the sector being uninhabitable. The mighty Carvax Empire had been so thoroughly defeated that they had covered up humanity's existence to protect their reputation. "So for 800 years, we've been alone in the galaxy because the Carvax were too embarrassed to admit they lost," Jake said. "That's exactly right," Dr. Campbell replied. "They saved face by pretending we didn't exist." Jake smiled as he thought about what this meant for humanity's future in the galaxy. They weren't just newcomers to the stars. They were the species That had defeated one of the most powerful empires in galactic history. And they had done it before they even knew there was a galaxy. As the UE's horizon approached Earth's solar system, the translation teams worked frantically to decode the final sections of the Carvax records. What they found painted a picture of complete alien defeat that was both amazing and terrifying. Captain Jake Morrison realized that humanity had won their first galactic war without even knowing they were fighting one. "Captain, we've translated the Carvax Admiral's personal log," Dr. Lisa Campbell said as she handed him the latest batch of files. "His final entries are ... disturbing." Jake took the tablet and began reading. The Carvax Admiral had started his mission with supreme confidence. His personal notes from the beginning of the invasion were filled with contempt for humanity and certainty of quick victory. But as the war progressed, his tone had changed dramatically. By the third month of the invasion, he was already questioning his assumptions, Dr. Campbell explained. The humans weren't behaving like any species the Carvax had encountered before. The Admiral's log described his growing confusion as human forces continued to fight despite suffering terrible losses. Every military manual in the Carvax Empire said that primitive species would surrender once they realized the futility of resistance. But humans seemed to become more determined with each defeat. "Look at this entry," Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez said, pointing to a section of text. "The Admiral writes that human forces had somehow managed to track and attack 3 of his ships while they were in hyperspace. He couldn't understand how a species without faster-than-light travel could even detect ships moving between star systems." Jake read the report with growing amazement. Human engineers had somehow figured out how to detect the energy signatures of ships entering and leaving hyperspace. They had used this knowledge to predict where Carvax vessels would appear and had set up ambushes using modified nuclear weapons. The Admiral was starting to panic, Dr. Campbell continued. He kept requesting reinforcements, but his superiors were telling him to handle the situation with the forces he had. They refused to believe that a primitive species could pose a real threat to their empire. The next section of the log showed the Admiral's increasing desperation. He had deployed increasingly powerful weapons against Earth, but each escalation had been met with human countermeasures. When he had used biological weapons, humans had developed vaccines. When he had tried orbital bombardment, humans had moved their operations underground and into space. "Here's where it gets really interesting," Amy said, showing Jake a detailed tactical analysis. The Admiral started studying human military history to try to understand why they were so effective at war. Jake read the aliens' analysis of human warfare with fascination. The Carvax Admiral had discovered that humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. They had developed tactics for every type of environment and situation imaginable. Desert warfare, jungle warfare, mountain warfare, naval warfare. Humans had experience with all of it. The Admiral realized that humans had been preparing for galactic war for thousands of years without even knowing it. Dr. Campbell explained. Every conflict in human history had taught them something about strategy, tactics, and survival. The log entry showed that the Admiral had been particularly impressed by human adaptability. Where other species followed rigid military doctrines, humans seemed to invent new tactics on the spot. They would analyze enemy weaknesses and develop counter-strategies within hours or days. "Look at this battle report," Amy said, showing Jake a detailed account. Human forces had captured a Carvax cruiser and were using it to attack other alien ships. But they didn't just use the ship as it was. They modified it with human weapons and tactics. Jake read about human engineers who had combined alien energy weapons with human targeting systems. They had installed human-designed armor plating and modified the ship's engines for better maneuverability. Within weeks, they had turned a captured alien vessel into something more dangerous than the original. The Admiral couldn't believe what he was seeing, Dr. Campbell said. He wrote that humans seemed to improve everything they touched. They took alien technology and made it better, faster, and more effective. The log contained detailed descriptions of human creativity in action. Human forces had used their knowledge of asteroid mining to turn space rocks into guided missiles. They had modified industrial equipment to create weapons that could penetrate alien armor. They had even used their entertainment technology to create sophisticated jamming systems that confused alien sensors. "Here's my favorite part," Amy said, showing Jake a particularly detailed entry. The Admiral describes a human attack on his flagship. They used modified construction robots to cut through the ship's hull, then sent in boarding parties wearing nothing but environmental suits and carrying tools they had turned into weapons. Jake read the account with growing pride. The human boarding party had been outnumbered 50-1, but they had advantages the aliens couldn't counter. They were smaller and more agile than the Carvax, allowing them to move through areas the aliens couldn't reach. They were also more adaptable, using their knowledge of industrial equipment to disable alien systems in ways the Carvax had never imagined. The psychological impact was devastating, Dr. Campbell explained. The Carvax had built their empire on the belief that size and strength were the most important factors in warfare. Humans proved that intelligence and determination mattered more. The Admiral's log showed his growing respect for human capabilities. He had started the war believing that humans were barely intelligent animals. By the end, he was writing about them as if they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. "Listen to this entry," Amy said, reading from the tablet. The Admiral writes, "These creatures are not soldiers in any sense that we understand. They are survivors who have learned to weaponize everything around them. They do not fight like a military force. They fight like their entire species has declared war on the universe itself." Jake found himself nodding as he read more of the Admiral's observations. The alien had correctly identified what made humans so dangerous. They had spent millions of years learning to survive in conditions that would kill most other species. Earth's hostile environment had forged them into the ultimate survivors. The Admiral tried everything he could think of, Dr. Campbell said. He attempted to negotiate with human leaders, offering them advanced technology in exchange for surrender. He tried to frighten them with displays of power. He even tried to bribe them with promises of positions in the Carvax Empire. None of it worked. Nothing worked. The humans told him that Earth was their home, and they would die before they let aliens conquer it. The Admiral couldn't understand that kind of thinking. To the Carvax, surrendering and living under alien rule was preferable to fighting and dying. The final entries in the Admiral's log showed his complete breakdown. He had begun to question everything he believed about warfare and civilization. The humans had shattered his understanding of how the galaxy worked. "Here's his last entry before the ship's systems failed," Amy said, showing Jake the final page. He writes, "I have failed not just my empire, but my understanding of what it means to be intelligent. These Death World creatures have taught me that we know nothing about war, nothing about survival, and nothing about the strength that comes from refusing to surrender. If there are others like them in the galaxy, then all our conquests mean nothing. We are not the strongest species in the universe. We are simply the species that has not yet met our match." Jake set down the tablet and looked out at Earth, now visible in the distance. The planet that had seemed so ordinary to him just weeks ago now looked different. It wasn't just humanity's home. It was the forge that had created the most dangerous species in the galaxy. "There's one more thing," Dr. Campbell said quietly. "We found the Admiral's final message to the Carvax High Command, the one he sent just before his ship's power failed completely." She handed Jake another tablet. The message was short but powerful. The Death World species cannot be conquered. They have turned their planet's hostility into their greatest weapon. We came to destroy them, and they have destroyed us instead. I recommend immediate withdrawal of all Imperial forces and permanent quarantine of this sector. These creatures must never be allowed to spread beyond their world." Jake laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. He was trying to protect the galaxy from us. And it worked, Amy added. The Carvax classified Earth as a forbidden zone and spread false information about our sector being uninhabitable. For 800 years, we've been alone in the galaxy because they were too afraid to admit they lost. As the Horizon prepared to dock at Earth's main orbital station, Jake thought about what this discovery meant for humanity's future. They weren't just newcomers to the galactic community. They were the species that had defeated one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy's history. The Carvax had made a fatal error in their assessment of humanity. They had seen Earth's hostile environment as a weakness that would make humans easy to conquer. Instead, they had found a species that had been forged by millions of years of surviving everything their planet could throw at them. "The irony is perfect," Dr. Campbell said as Earth grew larger in the viewscreen. The arrival of the UES Horizon and its alien prize caused a sensation throughout human space. News of the discovery spread quickly through the colonies, and within hours, every major news network was broadcasting the story. Humanity had finally found proof that they were not alone in the galaxy, and the proof came with an amazing revelation about their own history. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room at Earth's Orbital Command Center, watching as scientists and military officials studied the translated Carvax records. The room was packed with the most important people in human space, all trying to understand what this discovery meant for humanity's future. "The implications are staggering," said Admiral Kate Foster, the head of Earth's defense forces. "We've been alone in the galaxy for 800 years because we won a war we didn't even know we were fighting." Dr. Lisa Campbell stood at the front of the room, presenting her analysis of the Carvax records. The alien data had revealed not just the story of humanity's first galactic war, but also detailed information about the galaxy itself. The Carvax had maintained extensive records of other species, trade routes, and political structures. According to these records, there are dozens of intelligent species in our region of the galaxy, Dr. Campbell explained. Most of them are members of something called the Galactic Trade Federation. They've been conducting business and sharing technology for thousands of years. Jake listened as she described a galaxy full of life and civilization that humanity had never known existed. There were species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, others that had developed incredible medical technology, and some that had learned to terraform entire planets. "The question now is what we do with this information," Admiral Foster said. "Do we make contact with these other species? Do we reveal ourselves to the galaxy?" Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez raised her hand from the back of the room. "Admiral, there's something else you should know. The Carvax records contain detailed assessments of human capabilities. They studied us very carefully during the war." She activated a holographic display that showed the Carvax military analysis of humanity. The alien assessment was both flattering and terrifying. They had classified humans as apex survivors with unprecedented adaptability and extreme resistance to defeat. They identified several traits that made humans uniquely dangerous, Amy continued. Our ability to cooperate under stress, our talent for finding solutions to impossible problems, and our refusal to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. Jake read through the assessment with growing amazement. The Carvax had recognized that humans possessed something special, a combination of intelligence, determination, and adaptability that was rare in the galaxy. They had concluded that humanity was potentially the most dangerous species they had ever encountered. "There's more," Dr. Campbell said, pulling up another section of the records. The Karvax weren't the only ones who knew about Earth. They shared their assessment with other members of their alliance before they were destroyed. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If other alien species knew about humanity's capabilities, then Earth's isolation might not last much longer. Someone, somewhere in the galaxy, knew that humans existed and knew how dangerous they could be. We need to prepare for contact, Admiral Foster decided. If the galaxy knows about us, then we need to know about the galaxy. Over the following weeks, teams of experts worked to extract every piece of useful information from the Karvax records. They learned about galactic politics, trade relationships, and military capabilities. They discovered that the galaxy was not a peaceful place. There were ongoing conflicts, territorial disputes, and several aggressive species that posed potential threats. The good news is that most galactic species seem to prefer diplomacy to warfare, Dr. Campbell reported during one of the daily briefings. The bad news is that there are several aggressive empires that might see humanity as a threat. Jake found himself assigned to a new mission, leading the first human diplomatic expedition to make contact with the Galactic Trade Federation. The irony was not lost on him. He had started this journey as an explorer looking for signs of alien life, and now he was going to introduce humanity to a galaxy that had been deliberately avoiding them. The Karvax records include detailed star charts and communication protocols. Amy explained as they prepared for the mission. We know where to find the Federation's main diplomatic station and how to request a meeting. The preparation took months. Human engineers studied alien technology and began developing new ships capable of matching galactic standards. Diplomats studied alien cultures and learned to speak several galactic languages. Scientists worked to understand the economic and political systems that governed interstellar civilization. But the most important preparation was psychological. Humanity had to come to terms with the fact that they were not newcomers to the galactic community. They were the species that had defeated one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. They were already legends, even if they didn't know it. According to the Karvax records, several species have been studying the wreckage of their invasion fleet, Dr. Campbell reported. They've been trying to figure out what could have destroyed such a powerful force so completely. Jake smiled at the thought. For 800 years, alien scientists had been puzzling over the mystery of the Karvax defeat. They had found evidence of human weapons and tactics in the wreckage, but they had no idea who humans were or where they had come from. They're going to be very surprised when we show up, Amy said with a grin. The day finally came for humanity's first official contact with galactic civilization. Jake stood on the bridge of the new diplomatic vessel UES Ambassador as it approached the Federation's main station. The station was enormous, a massive structure that housed representatives from dozens of different species. Incoming transmission, the communications officer reported. They're requesting identification and stating, "Our purpose." Jake took a deep breath and activated the communication system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Ambassador. We represent the human species from the planet Earth, and we request permission to speak with Federation representatives." There was a long pause before the response came. When it did, Jake could hear the shock in the alien voice. "Did you say human species? From Earth?" "That's correct. We come in peace, seeking to establish diplomatic relations with the galactic community." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Please stand by. We are contacting our superiors." Jake waited patiently as alien officials tried to figure out how to handle humanity's sudden appearance. He could imagine the conversations taking place. Throughout the station, as news of the humans' arrival spread, finally, a new voice came over the communication system. This one sounded older and more authoritative. "Captain Morrison, This is Ambassador Chun of the Galactic Trade Federation. We have been expecting you. Please dock at Bay 7. We have much to discuss." As the ambassador moved toward the docking bay, Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with the discovery of a derelict alien ship and had led to the revelation that humanity was already one of the most famous species in the galaxy. "They've been expecting us," Dr. Campbell said with wonder. "They know who we are." "Of course they do," Jake replied. "We're the species that turned a death world into a home and used it to forge ourselves into the galaxy's most dangerous survivors. We're the species that defeated the mighty Carvax Empire using nothing but determination and creativity." As the ship docked and the airlock opened, Jake prepared to step into a galaxy that had been waiting 800 years to meet the legendary humans. The Carvax had tried to destroy humanity and had failed completely. Instead, they had created the galaxy's greatest mystery and most feared legend. The death world of Earth had kept its children safe by making them strong. Now those children were ready to take their place among the stars, not as newcomers seeking acceptance, but as the proven survivors who had already earned their place through victory. Jake stepped through the airlock and into galactic history, carrying with him the legacy of a species that had learned to call the impossible home and had used that knowledge to become unstoppable. The galaxy was about to learn what humans had always known, that there was no force in the universe more dangerous than people who refused to give up. Behind him, the derelict Carvax ship would be preserved as a monument to human achievement. It would remind future generations that humanity had already faced its greatest test and had emerged victorious. The Death World had forged them well, and now it was time to show the galaxy what Earth's children could accomplish when they set their minds to it. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human expansion had begun.